So, Cheryl Van Ness is a PhD candidate in mathematics education, has been a teaching assistant in the Department of Learning and Teaching for the last 3 years. Building on her extensive experience teaching middle school mathematics, developing mathematics educational materials for various mathematical publishers, and conducting mathematics professional development with several New Jersey schools, she's published materials and tools for teacher professional development. After completing her MA and MED in mathematics education at Rutgers, she has continued working with pre- and in-service teachers, supporting their development of mathematical ideas and practices. It's my pleasure, my final introduction, Cheryl Van Ness.
So I just wanted to thank Randy because before I begin, I did want to say that this has been a great brown bag lecture series this term, and we've had amazing speakers from all over the world, and I was honored to be asked to present my research for you, so thank you so much for inviting me. And I also wanted to make note, we're not really going to play with the Cuisenaire rods during the presentation, like formally, but I'd like for you, I put Cuisenaire rods on the tables and on the chairs, and I won't be offended if you play with them while I'm talking, because understanding how the Cuisenaire rods work will help you better understand the results of my study that I'm going to share with you. So please don't be afraid to take a look at the prompts, which are the prompts from the videos that I used in my study, and play with the Cuisenaire rods. And if it makes noise when they're clicking together, I love that noise because it means people are engaging. So don't be afraid to do that. As I said, I'm honored to share with you my research today. I'm going to share a expansion of a talk that I gave at AERA, which was very well received. And basically, it's a summary of my dissertation research to date. The title of my talk is VMC Analytic Video Narratives as Support for Teachers Studying of Argumentation. So during my talk, I am going to obviously explain what a VMC analytic is. I'm going to give you some views on argumentation, and I am going to talk about my two-part study. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Cuisenaire rods, so if by the time we get to the results part, you've kind of looked at them yourself and thought about them, that will aid you in understanding. We're not going to talk very much, but just a little bit about them. I'm going to share with you some of my preliminary results, which I think are really exciting, and then we'll have time for questions and suggestions. So my broad research focus. First of all, I feel that students in mathematical classrooms of all ages should learn both content and be engaged in the mathematical practices. So what are the mathematical practices? Some of them are argumentation, modeling, perseverance, making sense of problems. And if you're interested in what research and standards have to say about mathematical practices, you can look at the NCTM 2000 work as well as the Common Core State Standards where they list them. The other idea is that teachers play a key role in what students understand about mathematics and also what practices they engage in the classroom. And so teacher education and professional development programs should strive to support teachers both in service and pre-service so they're better able to teach the content as well as teach the practices. So I use these broad ideas to focus my own research on argumentation and on the use of video. So why did I choose argumentation? First of all, mathematics education literature as well as the standards for mathematics agree that argumentation is a very key practice. Also, as a matter of fact, the Common Core State Standard Mathematical Practice 3 states that students should be able to construct viable arguments as well as critique the arguments of others. Also, researchers have found that communication and cognition are closely linked, and argumentation is a form of communication. So argumentation makes visible what students understand about the content, but it also helps to build and form what students understand based on the social argumentation that happens in group settings like a classroom. As a matter of fact, Dweck in 1999 stated that argumentation is an important mechanism of personal and social production of knowledge in mathematics. So my view of argumentation has been informed by Toulmin in his 1958 work, as well as his 2003 sort of updated work. And if you're interested more, I'm not going to go into depth into Toulmin today, but if you're interested in that, I would love to talk to you more about how Toulmin informed my analysis and informed my study. But for now, just in general, I'm focused on students making claims, providing evidence, using warrants, challenging and refuting claims, making counterclaims, and providing counter-arguments. So why did I choose video? For several reasons. First of all, video has been used successfully in teacher education throughout the years. As we have more sophisticated ways of capturing video and showing video, it's becoming more and more important in teacher education. Video from existing collections have been used successfully for teacher development and also for teacher education programs for in-service and pre-service teachers. And video narratives that tell a story about students' reasoning have been used successfully at the university level. So some of the studies have reported that they have engaged students in this is students at the university level, in collaboration, in discussion, in building representations. They've also helped the university professor gain insight into their students' thinking, as well as helping the students engage in complex issues. So that's why I chose video. So we have this existing body of research that shows the importance of argumentation, that says that teachers play a key role in what students learn, and that video has been useful in supporting teacher learning in service and pre-service, specifically these video narratives, these VMC analytics. But there's still an open question, and that open question is, how might VMC analytic video narratives be used to support teachers' understanding of mathematical practices, specifically argumentation, which led me to my guiding question for my two-part study. How can the VMC analytic video narrative, and as I said, I'm going to explain that in a few minutes so you know what I'm talking about, be used to support teachers' understanding of argumentation and recognizing of argumentation in student discourse? Specifically, what do these pre- and in-service teachers recognize about student argumentation before the intervention, and what do they recognize after? So as I said, I have a two-part study. In my first part, I actually developed and published video narratives that show students engaging in argumentation in the classroom. Part two is that I use these video narratives in an intervention with pre- and in-service teachers to support their understanding of argumentation. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about both parts. So part one was my creation and publication of my video narratives, specifically of the VMC analytics. So let me give you some background about what a VMC analytic is and why I chose to use it as my tool. The Robert B. Davis Institute for Learning, or the RBDIL for short, right here at Rutgers, has more than 4,500 hours of video data that is both longitudinal and cross-sectional, following some students for more than 25 years. These students are situated in diverse problem-solving settings: urban, suburban, rural, as well as whole class situations, small group situations, and interview. Students are engaging in open-ended mathematical problem solving, and their reasoning has been captured on the video. In order to make this collection of video data available to the public, we have an NSF-funded video repository where we've included selected videos from this 4,500 hours. And anybody can access it at videomosaic.org. So in order to make this these video clips more available and easy to use for teachers and researchers and graduate students and teacher education professionals. The RU Core Libraries here at Rutgers developed what's called the RU Analytic Tool. And this is available to anybody at Rutgers. And basically the tool allows you to go into a video collection. In my case, I went into the VMC collection, but if you had a collection, you could also use it to go into your collection and to take snippets of video or episodes from your video clips, string them together to tell a story. So you can see here, these are what we call events, which are short video clips. So this first one is about 1.5 minutes long, and it's taken from a longer video clip. And these events can be strung together to tell a specific story, whatever you want to draw attention to for your viewers. Each event has the ability to create a description and a title that, again, it focuses your viewer on what you want them to notice about the video. As you can imagine, thinking about the collections that you may have experience with, you might be able to tell stories about a variety. I mean, I don't want to say infinite, we'll talk about infinity later, but a variety of topics: collaboration, teacher questioning, student interaction. For me, I did argumentation, but really the possibilities are endless. So, but you want to focus when you make a video narrative, you want to focus your viewer's attention on something specific. So you do that through this annotation part of the tool. And then also to further focus attention, you've got you can also do an overall title and an overall description that tells your whole story of the analytic. So the RU Analytic tool can be used, like I said, to make video narratives for any video collection that you have access to. I decided to use the VMC, which was the videomosaic.org, and to make mine. So the VMC Analytic is the video narrative. There are 50 published VMC Analytics right now, and including the 3 that I published for my study. And you can access them. I'll show you in a minute where you can access them. But because of the rich selection of student reasoning videos, I decided to use this VMC collection in order to make my video narratives. It was a logical choice. It's not the only video collection that I could have used, but it was a video collection that I thought had what I needed to show student argumentation. So if you're interested in the published analytics, you can go to videomosaic.org/analytics, and you'll see this page. And each one of these published analytics has a persistent URL that you can cite in a work just like you would cite any video, any published work. So back to the first part of my study, I wanted to create these narratives. My story I wanted to tell was what does argumentation look like in students of different ages? So in order to do this, I searched the video data collection to find episodes of students engaging in argumentation. And then I chose from these video clips short events that I thought illustrated different elements of argumentation. Again, I used Toolman as my guide. So I was looking for episodes where students were making claims, giving evidence, using warrants, refuting claims, making counterclaims, counterarguments, etc. So I used the RU Analytic tool to produce these video narratives, and I crafted for each event a title and a description that I felt described the argumentation in each event. And I wanted to quote the students, so available also on the VMC are transcripts of what the students actually said. So I went back into those to make sure that when students, especially when they were making claims or providing evidence, things that were specific to argumentation, that I could quote them directly. I crafted an overall title and an overall description that described the story of my narrative, and then I submitted my analytics for a very rigorous review and revision process. And then when they were ready, I submitted them for publication. So I have produced 4 video narratives to use in my study. The first 3, this one, and this one, are published. This one I'm going to talk later is actually the analytic that I used for my pre and my post assessment with teachers. So it's what I call, and it's the first time this has ever been done, it's what I call an empty analytic. So it doesn't have titles and it doesn't have descriptions, but it does have the strung together events. And what I did, like I said, I'll talk about this more, but I wanted to see if teachers could pick out the argumentation in the analytic that I created. So I asked them to provide the title and provide the description both before the intervention and after. To give you an idea of what kind of argumentation I was able to find in the students' discourse, I want to show you a couple of short clips from this first analytic. It's called The Fourth Grader's Argumentation About the Density of Fractions Between 0 and 1. I love this session because we have little 4th graders arguing about infinity. And it's funny because in a clip that in an event I'm not showing you, one of the little girls says, "It's hard to explain." And I'm thinking, yeah, for a little 9-year-old, infinity is hard to explain. But they do a really great job getting their heads around what this might mean. So in this particular analytic, they are arguing about whether infinitely many fractions can be plotted between 0 and 1 on a number line. Some students agree, some students don't agree. So in the events 2 and 3 that I'm going to show you, they come at the beginning. So this video narrative has 18 events. This is at the very beginning where students are first starting to talk about it. And one of the students, Alan, he says, you can plot infinitely many fractions between 0 and 1. As a matter of fact, you can plot zillions, which is sort of a word that became taken as shared as meaning something you can't count. And then 2 other students disagree. This little boy that you see with his arms out, he says, to plot infinitely many fractions, you would need the longest number line in the world. And then another little boy said, no, it depends on what you cut your hole into. So it's interesting. I'd like you to watch the argumentation that these boys participate in. And hopefully the internet will work. It did work perfectly before, but you know, if it can go wrong, it goes wrong.
Divide that, though. You can divide from 0 to 1 into the smallest of fractions. So you can imagine, you can divide it into zillions. Yeah.
Did you hear what Alan said? Eric, did you hear what Alan said? You want to say that one more time?
You could divide it into zillions. And it would still be space in there.
You could divide into zillions. You could divide into zillions depending on what number you want.
I'm talking about this little piece.
Right. Now, if you made a number line to show zillions,
Right.
you'd have to have the longest number line. Alan, that doesn't make sense.
It does.
Even if you get the only way you could divide into zillions, it is depending on how big your one hole is. If your one hole is 10, you can't divide into zillions.
Well,
It has to be a zillion.
from 0 to 1, you could. You could divide it
One hole is
into
10.
zillions.
How can you divide into zillions?
Alan,
So in the next 2 little short events I'm going to show you, Alan is actually going to answer the question, how could you divide it into zillions? So I just wanted to point out here, this is the title that I gave for this event and also the description. This is a very long session. The students persevered in arguing about this for about an hour and a half. In my 18 events, my analytic that I created, that only about between like a minute, between 30 seconds and a minute and a half, I've only showed a short part of this, and then I'm only showing a very short part of it now. This comes, the next two events that I'm going to show you are from events 13 and 15. And this is Alan's evidence. He goes up to the board and he produces some evidence about why he thinks that you can plot infinitely many fractions. So first he says if you take a number line and you increase the space between 0 and 100th using some kind of magnifying device, look, you can plot more fractions. And then he goes on to further his argument to say you could even take that space, each one of those little things, and you could expand it and show even more. So this is the idea of getting towards infinity, where you could continue this over and over. So let's see what Alan says.
Up here.
We're doing college water.
Like, this could be the size of the wall. Maybe that one. 0. This could be the size of the wall. There would be your line. Now, if you had the hundreds, which would probably go somewhere in here, it would look, say, as if it was right here. And then you would have all that space in there. It looks like it, but you really don't have that much space. It's just, that's just, if you had it really big, that's how much space it would look like you see. So that means, like, you could divide this into halves and thirds and fourths and fifths and all of that. Right? That's interesting. Yeah, because it looks like you've got a lot of space, but you really only have that teensy-weensy bit of space in between there. I mean, you could take, like, a really small pen, and you could divide this up into all those pieces. But
That would be really
looking at it
that
with your
regular
regular,
little piece up into
if you look at it
pieces.
with your regular eye, you couldn't see that. So you'd have to make it bigger.
Where does that go? Does it make sense? We should more understand this.
Yeah. Now, that's the other next one. You can divide that space up into all little lines. Now, if you write those spaces, and here would be the little bars, you could divide this space up into tiny pieces.
Okay, does
And if
anyone
you
have
have
to,
that, you could divide.
does anyone have a question?
So that gives you a little taste of the type of argumentation that I was able to find in this collection in order to create my analytics. So part 2, once I published the 3 analytics and created the fraction assessment analytic, I completed an intervention with teachers. So my study was a design-based research study with 2 iterations, and there's a 3rd iteration going on now. There were 20 pre- and in-service teachers enrolled in mathematics education courses from a large northeastern university. The first iteration had a mix of master's, post-bac students. They were all pre-service, post-bac students, and students in the 4th year of a 5-year education program focused on secondary mathematics. And the second iteration were a mix of pre-service and in-service teachers that were in both a doctoral program and a master's program. So during what my intervention entailed, during the semester, the students studied the 3 analytics that I created. So by studying, what I told them to do was look at all the video clips and read the description. And then they also discussed them online in an online forum. I collected pre- and post-assessment data from my population. So my data sources were, first of all, I asked them to describe their thoughts about argumentation, both before and after, by answering these two questions. What do you think argumentation means with respect to learning math? And what is your experience with argumentation in the mathematics classroom? And then, as I said, I created this assessment or skeleton analytic with no descriptions and no titles. And I asked them to go and watch it and to add titles and descriptions that highlighted the argumentation in each event, and also to create an overall title and description. I asked them to do this before, and then I asked them to revisit their descriptions after the intervention. They also discussed some questions online, and the questions that I asked them to think about and discuss with one another focused on elements of argumentation that they saw, and the claims that children made, the evidence for those claims, and also whether the claims were changed, either modified or refuted or challenged, and was the argument resolved in the end. So there were some differences among my iterations. I used a design study so that I could tweak it from semester to semester. And I didn't make major changes, but one of the things that I did change in the first and third iterations, I had the students watch the analytics, the teachers watch the analytics outside of the classroom. In the second iteration, they watched it inside the classroom during class. I looked after, I said in the second iteration, so after the second iteration, I took a look at the data. I didn't see any differences, so in the third iteration, we went back to watching it outside. In the second and third iterations, these next two bullets have to do with time. I gave them more time. The feedback I got in the first iteration was that this was very time-consuming for my teachers to do, so I gave them more time to watch the analytics, to discuss the analytics, to complete the pre and post, and in the second and third iterations. And then finally, in the third iterations, instead of using the analytic tool in order to write their descriptions and titles, I just had them write their description titles in a Word document, because I wanted to see whether it would make any difference in the data. That iteration, like I said, is ongoing. So I developed a coding scheme and a scoring rubric. This is my scoring rubric right here, and what I did was I listed all of the argumentation that could be seen in each event of that assessment analytic that I gave teachers, and I noted in their descriptions whether or not they mentioned it. And then I also was trying to monitor for their language. So were they picking up more of the mathematical register for argumentation? So I also noted whether or not they used language. So for example, this claim 3, Laura claims that 1/2 is bigger than 1/3. If they said something about a student saying that 1/2 was bigger than 1/3, they noted that element of argumentation. If they said that it was a claim, they noted it and they used the formal mathematical register. So I was trying to keep track of that as well. I also developed a coding scheme, and I used the online, which I know a lot of you are familiar with, the online coding platform Deduce, and I wanted to look for the correct use of elements of argumentation language, claim, evidence, again, informed by Tolman. And I worked with math educators to get inter-rater reliability, and we got greater than 85% inter-relater reliability, both in using the coding scheme and the coding rubric. And I also worked with mathematics education experts to verify my scoring rubric. So before I go into my results, I want to take a quick moment to talk about the Cuisenaire rods. So in order to understand my results that I'm about to show you, you have to keep in mind 3 layers. So the first layer is the students' work in the video with the Cuisenaire rods. You have to sort of get a sense of what the mathematics was and how they used the Cuisenaire rods. Then you have to understand the arguments they made about their work, and then the descriptions that the teachers made about the arguments. So that's why I want to spend just a few minutes discussing the Cuisenaire rods and what the students did with them. So Cuisenaire rods are, they're in front of you, you may be familiar with them. They have permanent color names, but variable number names depending on what you decide is your unit. And we focus on length as the attribute when we use these to model different numbers. So the number name depends on the rod that's chosen as a unit. So for example, if the dark green rod is 1, then the rods have different number names. The light green rod has the number name, anybody? 1/2. The red rod has the number name 1/3. And the white rod has the number name 1/6. Right, so that says 1/2, 1/3, 1/6. However, if we change what the unit is, so for example, if we say that a train of orange and red rods is 1, then the number names of all the other rods change. So in this case then, the dark green becomes 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/6, 1/12, as shown here. And these are ideas that the students played with. And then they were given the prompt that is on your sheet. So they, in the pre-assessment, in the assessment video that I had the teachers look at, students were working on which is greater, 1/2 or 1/3, and by how much. So they produced models where it depends, right, what their model was depending on what they said was 1. So if the dark green rod is 1, then the light green rod is 1/2, and the 1/3 the red rod is 1/3, and so you could use this to show your answer. But if you redefined your 1, as we did before, then your dark green rod becomes 1/2, and your light green rod becomes 1/3. So I'm going to show you an analysis of the argumentation that I saw, and I'm pretty excited because there was actually a lot of growth in students, both in their identifying more elements of argumentation as well as the structure of the argumentation that in the students' arguments that the teacher saw. So to give you an idea of what I am talking about with elements and structure, so structure is how those elements of argumentation are put together. Elements are like the claims, the evidence, the counterclaims that are mentioned. The structure is how they're connected to one another. So for example, suppose a claim is X and an evidence is Y. Teachers might say, students said claim X, but not mention evidence Y in the pre-assessment. In the post-assessment, they'll say, claim X and evidence Y. So then that would be growth in the argumentation elements that they noticed. Structure, though, goes beyond that. So a student might, I keep calling them students because they were my students, but I mean a teacher. A teacher might say, okay, claim X and claim Y in the pre-assessment, but in the post-assessment, they might say, claim X because of claim Y. And so that shows that they're not just talking about these elements separately, but they're linking them. And I have a chart which I hope will make it clearer in a minute. So what did I find? I found in addition to their growth in both elements and structure of argumentation that they described, they also became more focused in their use of the formal mathematical register. So they used the language. They were more likely to use the language of argumentation in their descriptions. So before I go more into my results, I wanted to just show you a short clip from the analytic that I created, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you what are the students' pre- and post-assessment descriptions for event 6. And so in order to sort of understand what he's talking about in the event, I want you to kind of see what the student in the event is doing, right? Because there's these 3 layers. The student in the video has some mathematics and argumentation, and then what I analyzed was the description that the teachers mentioned in their analytic. And I might not show all of this because of time, but I do think it's important to kind of get a sense of what.
What do you think?
Well, they said is 1/3 is bigger than a half by 1/3. I think they said. Is that what they said? Well, I don't really agree because, well, if you split one of the thirds in half, which would make a sixth, I think it's a sixth bigger. Like, well, should I go up there?
Sure. Maybe can you make a little space here for Brian? Maybe have you have a little conference here. We have some disagreement.
See, for when they said it was 1/2 bigger, if you split a third in half, it'd make a sixth. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like pretending they were splitting half. No, one of these. If you split one of these in half and you have 3 of them up there, they make 6. And anyway, and when you split it in half, right in the middle over there, it's kind of like that. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like this. There was, that was the 1/3, and that was the 1/2 on the bottom. And so it's just like this, and the red I'm pretending is like a half of one of the purples. And you see when I split it in half, it's 1/6, and it equals up to a green. Considering a red, what he said, because two of these equals, see, they're two halves of one purple, and the purple is a third, and the half of a third is 6. There's 6.
So that was the event that this student that I'm about to show you described. There was a lot of argumentation going in there. So I was interested to see this teacher and how much argumentation the teacher described. So this is the pre-assessment on the top. This was the description that the teacher wrote of that event on the top, and this is the post-assessment. So there are a few things that, like I said, there are a few ways that I saw growth. One was in more elements of argumentation. One was in describing better the structure of the argumentation. One was giving more detail about the argumentation that was given. And the last one was using the formal mathematical register. So I chose this one to show, although this is sort of representative of my data set, but I chose this one to show because I think this student does all 4. So to give you an idea, in the pre-assessment, this is basically a claim that the student made both in the pre and the post, same claim. This, when I keep saying teacher, I keep saying student, but I mean teacher. The teacher then, this is another claim. Now he kind of changes it a little bit, but basically this is the same claim both in the pre and the post. This is evidence that he mentioned both in the pre and the post, but you can see that in the post he gave more detail. And then this is a claim that he only made in the pre, but it's really referencing something that happened before in the analytic, and he doesn't really connect it. He doesn't mention that. He actually changes that in the post to include this element of argumentation and an additional element of argumentation. So these are 2 elements of argumentation that he doesn't mention in his assessment. In order to kind of give you a map, I thought it would be helpful to include a chart of the way that I see the structure of the argumentation in both the pre and the post assessment for this teacher. So to be more detailed, you can see. So this is a claim that the teacher says that the student Brian makes, that 1/2 cannot be larger, cannot be 1/3 larger than 1/3. Then he makes another claim, he being the teacher, that Brian also says the difference between the 2 numbers, 1/2 and 1/3, is 1/6, but he doesn't connect them in this description. Then he does have some connectivity here. So he talks about some evidence and relates it to a claim. he says that, and I gave you the model just to so you could keep track of the mathematics. 2 red rods are equal to the length of a purple rod, 1/3, and half of 1/3 is 1/6. So the claim, the red must represent 1/6. So this is a little bit of connection that the teacher is making. And then he has this other claim. When Audra showed that a red rod placed with a purple rod equaled the size of the green rod, the diagram, which I've included here, was actually displaying a difference of 1/6 between the two quantities. So the teacher probably had wanted to link this to something. He's in his head, but the linking is not clear. So, it sort of just stands there by itself. Now, if we look at the post-assessment, I've done a similar type of argument, a similar type of diagramming of the argument, and you can see already, just a brief look at it, that there are more connections being made. So specifically, Brian makes a counter-argument to the claim that 1/2 is 1/3 larger than 1/3. So this counter-argument, the fact that the teacher mentions the counter-argument in this first sentence basically situates this entire rest of the paragraph in that this is a counter-argument. So that's why it's that's why everything else is in here. It also specifically says that it's a counter-argument to the previous claim, which was 1/2 is 1/3 larger than 1/3. So you can see here that it's connected here. So the next thing he says is not just a claim, but he calls it a counterclaim. The counterclaim is that the difference between the two fractions is actually 1/6. So again, this is situated within the counterargument and linked to this previous claim. And then he gives the same linked argument that he gave in the pre-assessment, but you can see if you remember what the size of this box, that he gives much more detail in the evidence that he is giving. So he takes he meaning Brian, so this is my teacher describing what Brian in the video you just saw did. So he takes one of the purple rods that the girls had given the measurement of 1/3. He says that if you cut 1/3 into 2 halves, it will produce 2 smaller rods, each having a measurement of 1/6. Brian shows the class that the 2 red rods are equal in length to the purple rod, and so he links it to the claim in the same way that he did in the pre-assessment, that the red rod must equal 1/6. But then he doesn't have that sort of brown claim that was kind of vague in the previous. Instead, he goes on to say that this, meaning this evidence that Brian has just given, and this claim counters a previous claim made by the girls, which is different from anything that has been said so far, that the red rod has a value of 1/3. So the teacher is picking up that the evidence in the claim that the student makes counters a claim made by another student. And then finally he adds this very last sentence, which is evidence that kind of brings a closure to the description that the teacher gave of Brian's argument. So Brian finishes his argument by placing the purple 1/3 rod and the 1/6 rod next to each other, and shows that their combined length is equal to 1 green 1/2 rod. So this evidence links this claim that the red rod must be 1/6 back to his counterclaim that the difference between the two fractions is actually 1/6. So as we look at the pre and post argumentation structure, you can see that in the pre-assessment it looks like this, with several elements that most are not connected. But in the post-assessment, the elements are connected and there are more of them. And if you noticed, he used more of the mathematical register for argumentation as well: counter-argument, claim, counterclaim, etc. So 2 other results that I found that I want to share with you before I close. One is that the teachers in the post-assessment seem to utilize this feature of the title to summarize the argumentation in the description in the post-assessment more than they did in the pre-assessment, and they actually also used the formal mathematical register to do that. So you can read these for yourself, but for example, in event 9, one of the teachers said, not 1 whole, but 1/6 as the title, which is kind of what is happening in that event. But in the post-assessment, they changed their language to make it more argumentation specific, refuting and modifying the claim that a white rod represents 1. So in many, many, many cases, their language matured and changed in the event titles. And just as a quick summary, the blue bar is the pre-assessment, and the post-assessment represented by the dark blue bar. The light blue bar is pre and the dark blue bar is post. And in all of these mentionings of argumentation language, they were used more in the post than the pre. The other thing, like I said, I had wanted to monitor the teachers taking up of the mathematical register for argumentation, and I did find positive results with regards to that. So you can see them here. I don't know if this is too small, but I've listed the numbers here because claim was so large. It kind of collapsed this scale. So I wanted to include the numbers. So in every case here, there was an increase from pre to post in the language that was used, except for here, this consensus right here. And I thought that was really interesting. I can only speculate why that is, but it seemed that in the beginning, the teachers came to my classroom kind of understanding that argumentation has to do with agreeing and disagreeing, right? So the way I coded for consensus is when the students used to agree and disagree. So they kind of knew coming in, and there was a little bit of a change where instead of just talking about agree and disagree in general, they started to use more specific terms. For example, counterclaim, right? So when you disagree, you state a counterclaim, challenging, counter-argument, etc. I thought that was kind of interesting. So I do have further analysis for this study. One thing I'm going to do is I have not completed the scoring of the teachers' responses or the diagramming of the flow of the argumentation. So I'm going to do that over the summer. And also, I'm going to do an analysis. I don't know if you remember from a while ago, but they answered those 2 questions about argumentation. What did they think argumentation was, and what evidence did they see? So I'm going to analyze those data. So the significance of my study. First of all, I found that studying VMC analytics does result in a useful supporting of teachers' understanding of argumentation. They understood argumentation as defined by those 4 categories, more elements, more detail in the elements, more structure, and more language in the post and the pre. If teachers can recognize more argumentation in students' discourse, then they have a better chance of being able to elicit argumentation in the classroom. VMC analytics also, I think, show promise, not just to show argumentation, but also other types of practices as well as maybe content. And that the RBDIL video data collection is a rich source from which we can make these analytics to show student reasoning. So today is Star Wars Day. Does anybody know about Star Wars Day? I would be remiss as a math geek if I did not say thank you very much. And in light of Star Wars Day, may the fourth be with you, because today is May 4th. So any comments or questions? Anything I could clarify? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very wonderful research. I have 2 questions. The first one is how many videos do you show the teachers, and have you looked at their discussion? Maybe in which period then their language has already showed improvement, right?
Right.
Yeah, and the second one is during their discussion, do you participate in their discussion and lead them to use some terms so this will help them?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I'm going to answer the second one first, because that was actually a methodological decision that I made. I really was I wanted to see how the analytics sort of did on their own in supporting teachers' learning of argumentation. So you could imagine that if you had a course with an argumentation expert plus the videos, you could almost you could be pretty sure that teachers are going to learn. But I wanted to see how the analytics did on their own. So I did very minimal intervention in the online discourse. I said things, when I did add comments, I said things like, that's really interesting, what do others think? Because I didn't want my own understanding of argumentation to influence them. The online discussions, however, were guided by those questions. So that was sort of the most that I wanted to do, was to guiding them to the idea of argumentation was to have them focus on the language in their online. So that was sort of a blanket thing I did at the beginning for each analytic. They watched 3, by the way. They watched 3. And I did see growth in their sort of uptaking of the language, which was not surprising in the online discourse, because the questions that I asked were, what claims did you see? What evidence did you see? What were claims challenged? So then in the discourse they started talking about claims. Yeah, that's really a really good question. Thank you. Anyone else? So let me ask you a question. Did you find that the diagramming of the argumentation was helpful, or was it confusing? Because it is sort of...
I think it was useful, Cheryl.
Okay, good. Because it is sort of complex, because you have these 3 levels. And so if I'm going to be, first of all, when I write this up in my dissertation, I'm going to use the diagramming, because I actually, my mom came up with that idea. I have to say, she goes, oh, if you had some kind of diagram, that might make it easier. So that's how I came up with the idea to diagram, and I think it does kind of show how things are connected. But I wasn't sure. For me, it's clear because I know it, but I wasn't sure if to you, and also to, because you may not really may not be an expert in argumentation, if it helped.
So I think it does help. I think one thing when you showed sort of the results at the end, I noticed that were codes that you didn't really discuss in detail in the example that you showed. So I think it might be useful, if you were presenting this, to have a slide that just looked at all your codes and just briefly remind people what those, what's a modifier, what's a warrant, right? Because you had modifier in there, which you didn't really talk about, and you had a couple of other ones in there.
Yeah.
To just help people sort of understand what those things are.
Yeah.
I think that would be useful. Otherwise, I think that the diagramming is very helpful.
It's time consuming, right, to go into each one of these. So I guess it depends on your audience.
Right. No, I don't think
you
need to show more examples necessarily. I just think you need to have a slide. And maybe I missed it, but I don't think I saw a slide with the coding.
Or alternatively, you can't report on a code if you don't give the audience a fighting chance to know what it is. So the alternative is just to show a shorter graphic.
Right.
But I agree with Ravit, you can't say modifiers, and Ravit and I have read our Tolman, but for the audience members who haven't, we don't know what that means.
Right. So maybe just focusing on, if I gave the same presentation, I would change the codes that I list in my presentation to just be the codes that are in that example. Because they're a subset anyway.
In the talk. So either you take your graphic with the pre-post and only have the categories that you talked about, or you have a slide that has all the categories on it.
That you're going, not all the categories, but the ones that I'm going to talk about.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Well, if anything that appears in your chart.
Yeah, you need to have to.
I can't say, I have more bumblebees, and I don't know if that's good or bad if I didn't define it.
Yep. So you mean here, like everything that's in here should be,
both in here and go forward one more. So do that.
Yeah.
Do you see where you have?
Yep.
The
modification. Yep.
What's the difference between a reputation and a kind of argument? Right?
Yep.
What's the difference between a reputation and a challenge? So those kinds of things I think you need to define, because if you're showing it at a conference and someone just reads it, or a talk, someone reads it, those questions are running into their head. They're not listening to a word you're saying now, they're just confused.
But I want to leave them out, because I think it's good to show that they didn't just stick to claim and counterclaim. They actually used the whole broad range of argumentation labels. But you're only going to show a short example, but just to show they really did learn how to use the richer.
Yeah, that's a really good
features.
suggestion. Thank you. Yes.
So, I guess I'm trying to understand. I feel like something you said. I'm trying to understand if that's the bigger significance of this. So, like a claim I could make, and I don't know if this is reasonable or not, is that teachers knowing how to analyze the structure of arguments by itself doesn't. It's not obvious to me that that's the best thing for teachers to know. But the idea potentially that teachers come in with the idea that argument is just people expressing different opinions versus argument is about connecting claims and evidence and connecting alternative claims and trying to weigh those against each other. That seems really potentially valuable. And so I guess I'm trying to understand, is that where you see this is as these things are kind of indicators about teachers' understanding about what argumentation is and how it can be used productively in the classroom? I mean,
So I guess if teachers are not able to recognize argumentation in students' discourse, then we can be pretty sure they're not going to be able to elicit that they're not going to be able to produce tasks that elicit that in their students, and even if they can elicit it, they're not going to recognize it, right? So that we can be pretty sure of. So it seemed to me that the first step in supporting students' understanding of argumentation, which is really important in the classroom, is to help them recognize it. Now, so at least when they see it in their classroom, they'll be like, oh, look, my students are, they're participating in argumentation. And then even further, if they can understand certain elements of argumentation, like a claim and linking them. So it's interesting because I did not, with my teachers, show them structure of argumentation at all. I didn't, in the events, it was implicit, it was never explicit. So in the descriptions that I created, I said things like, Alan made this claim about, infinity, and, or I say, Alan produced this evidence about infinity, and that supported his claim. Or Alan, and then, Eric produced a counterclaim to Alan's claim, saying that he didn't agree, and a counter argument where he produced this evidence and this warrant. So I did not do any kind of diagramming for them. So I thought actually when I started diagramming that it was pretty astonishing to me that not only did they pick up more of the elements of argumentation, but the teachers, actually linked them together themselves. And that I wanted to thank actually Keith for that, because I spoke with Keith and he said, but what about the structure? And I hadn't thought about really the structure. And when I went in to look, I realized, oh my goodness, they not only gave more detail and more elements, which was kind of art, and improved in their language, which was kind of easier to see, but when I started mapping it, I realized they were making these connections on their own. So I guess that my feeling is that the watching video narratives that are annotated of students participating in practices like argumentation can support the teachers noticing of argumentation in the videos and then maybe in their classrooms. I mean, I would need that would be like a lifetime research grant, right, to try to get into the classrooms and collect data on these teachers and see, did it improve in their classroom practice? We don't know, but it stands to reason that it might. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Great, thank you. Clark.
One more
I'm sorry, one more question.
Well, this is a comment,
Okay.
and it's a rather small point that I've also noticed over the years that sometimes small points can loom large when you're giving a job talk.
Okay.
So and I realized that you were using the language of the teacher, but 1/2 is bigger than 1/3, and then the argument, the difference is 1/6. That's not really a counter argument. All the evidence for the second argument also supports the first argument. So, and I know that the teacher used that, but I think you may want to make sure your audience knows you're aware of that.
Okay,
That
so
you're using
can you
the
tell me?
teacher's language, but in fact maybe that's not the best term for that. That maybe we, in
You're talking about this one here?
Yeah.
So, 1/2 is, so the previous claim was 1/2 is 1/3 larger than 1/3. The difference between the two fractions.
Oh, I see. I may have read the first one. I see.
Yeah, it's a
1/3.
different claim, right? One.
Oh, I see. I actually
Third,
couldn't
third,
see
third.
part of the claim. So I see it is actually a counterclaim.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, and
So
then,
my-
which is actually, I thought you were picking up the fact that this last one is actually different. That the value of the red rod the value of the red rod is 1/3. He thinks the value of the red rod is 1/6. So there's a lot of subtleties going on in what the kids are saying in the video, and so it's actually pretty astounding to me when I actually sat down to do this, that this student just saw the connections. Like, it was pretty cool. So.
Well, we are out of time.
Yes, thank you.
But thank you very much. If folks can help Cheryl out and put things back in your bags, and please ask Cheryl more questions if you have them.
Yeah,